Hello everybody, and welcome to episode 16 of How to Renovate. Today we will be talking about when you need an architect and when you might not. So when I'm speaking to clients or just anyone who's thinking about renovating, this comes up quite a lot because people generally want to know, is it worth spending that money on an architect? Do they really need to spend thousands on an architect when they might not need to? Now, I'm all for architects. They add when they are involved, or when they need to be involved. They really are an amazing resource. They can help you with so many things. If you find the right one, they can help you with so many things, which we're going to cover in this episode. So I am all for architects, but there are situations where you don't necessarily need to spend that money. So let's get into the episode, and we're going to look at 3 examples of when you do need an architect, and we're going to look at 2 examples of when you might not need an architect. Okay, so let's get started. Let's get into the episode. In our 5-pillar process, the info in this episode falls under pillar 3, people. Everything I teach about renovations falls under this process, and there'll be more information on how to get your hands on some resources about the process at the end of the episode. Okay, let's get started. Let's first look at those 3 examples of when you do need an architect. So, number 1 is additions and extensions. So, if you're adding any extra space to your home, like a ground floor extension or a loft extension, a loft conversion, I always recommend that you get the advice of an architect. These are quite complex projects, so there will be lots of things you will need to refer to the architect for. So obviously you'll need the drawings, not only for your planning permission, but the first thing your contractor will ask you for when you go to contractors for quotes. They will say, where are the architect's drawings? Because the architect's drawings will reference everything that's needed in those drawings so that the builder can accurately quote. So for example, the architect's drawings will involve or show the size of the windows, the size of the extensions, the thickness of the plasterboard, for example, the thickness of the plaster, even the ventilation gaps, the roofing materials. So the builder then can extract that information from those drawings and accurately work out the quantities of materials they need, the amount of labour that might need to construct what you need, the different skills, the window fitters, time the plumber needs to spend there, time the electrician needs to spend there. So the builders will always ask for those architect's drawings to quote. I mean, sometimes they won't, so they will quote sometimes without the architect's drawings if it's an extension or an addition. But then you do run the risk of it being a ballpark figure. There might be some things they might have missed, or they might not know because they're not clearly on the drawing. So in that situation, it is really good to have an architect on board. So moving on to number 2. So an architect is also really useful when you need some kind of design expertise. So they can provide some really valuable information on if you're stuck with your design, you don't quite know what to do. Let's say you're doing a major reconfiguration of your home, but that involves new windows, new doors, new roof lights, and if you feel you can't manage that yourself, and you're stuck with ideas, and perhaps, you know, structural elements where, say for example, you want to put a huge set of doors onto the garden. That obviously needs support. If it's a structural wall, it will need a lintel above the opening. So that's where an architect can really help as well with those things. And then of course that design eye that they'll have if you're not feeling quite comfortable with planning that yourself, that is where an architect can come in useful as well and might be needed on your project. Okay, so moving on to the next one, which is planning and permissions. So number 3, planning and permissions. So architects are really valuable in this aspect, because if your project needs planning permission, they will help you. So if it needs planning permission, it would usually be any kind of extension, loft conversion, anything where the exterior of the building is being extended, changed drastically, and so on. You will obviously need to apply. You put in a planning application to your local authority, and the architect will really help with this, because they will be familiar with the local requirements, like the planning and the regulations. So in the planning permission stage, they will really, or should really, hold your hand throughout all of that. So they should do the planning drawings, fill out any forms that need filling out, deal with the council, so deal with a planning officer. They will give you advice on what should be allowed and what shouldn't be allowed in your local area. So the architect really should support you throughout the entire planning permission stage. That is essentially their job. But also when it comes to during the project, for these kinds of projects where you're extending, your architect will also help you so much throughout, especially the first few phases of your renovation, where, you know, things need to be constructed properly. They will talk to the structural engineer and make sure things are being communicated properly and done properly. They will also help with building control and building regulations. So they should chat to building regulations and make sure that everything that's been done on site has been done to regulation, to safety regulations. And if it isn't, they will make suggestions to put it right, or they will check with a contractor or tell the contractor to put it right. So you can see there's quite a lot of involvement when it comes to an architect on site and for the planning phase for an extension or any kind of major renovation. So I would say that is definitely when you need an architect. Now let's move on to when you might not need an architect. So we'll go through just 2 situations where you don't necessarily need an architect. So number 1 is if you're doing a internal reconfiguration. So if you're not making any major changes to the outside of the home, then you probably don't need an architect. You can plan alongside your builder if you know what you want, if you've familiarized with yourself with the process, with what's involved, then, you know, you can probably manage with you and the contractor, and perhaps a structural engineer can be brought in for any major walls that need taking out, any steel calculations that need to be done. So between the 3 of you, you can probably manage your project and you won't need to pay an architect for an internal reconfiguration. Or another option is to use an interior designer. Let's say you're not comfortable doing that. You could use an interior designer, someone like myself, for example, a renovation consultant, an interior designer will quite comfortably handle quite major changes with an internal reconfiguration for you. So yeah, you can move walls, you can change rooms, you can do quite a lot if you're maintaining your external structure and just making changes within. Then you can work without an architect. Moving on to number 2. So the other situation where you might not need an architect is if you're doing obviously like simple remodeling or cosmetic changes. So if your renovation involves quite simple things like if you're just redoing a kitchen, you're doing a major kitchen renovation, perhaps you're breaking one wall down, you don't need an architect for that. Or if you're updating a kitchen or a bathroom, or kind of doing any kind of internal smaller remodeling work, then you don't need to employ an architect for that. So these projects can usually be handled quite comfortably between yourself and your contractor. So that is the second situation where you might not need an architect. So that really nicely brings us to the end of the episode. I hope this one was useful for you. I do hope that you enjoyed it and you continue to listen. And if you do, and if you're finding it helpful, please do me a favour and go and subscribe. It just helps others looking for the same information to actually find us. Thank you so much in advance, and I will see you next time. Bye for now. For more information on my 5-pillar process for successful renovation, you can go directly to southplacestudio.com/pillars, where you'll find an introduction to the process which covers each of the pillars and what they cover. We also have a number of other free renovation resources. Go now to southplacestudio.com/freebies. I have created some amazing freebies for you there. There is one on the process, like we just said. There is one on planning permission. There is one on kitchen design. There is another one on lighting planning. Go and check those out. There's so much free information there to help you with your renovation.